This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. The Supreme Court has upheld Michigan's ban on affirmative action at state colleges and universities. The case centers on a 2006 voter referendum in Michigan that barred race and sex-based preferences in admissions. An appeals court previously ruled the ban violates the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause. But in a 6-2 decision, the Supreme Court overruled the lower court. The justices in the majority argued policies affecting minorities that do not involve intentional discrimination should be decided at the ballot box rather than in the courtroom. In her dissent, Justice Sonia Sotomayor argued, quote, "The way to stop discrimination on the basis of race is to speak openly and candidly on the subject of race and to apply the Constitution with eyes open to the unfortunate effects of centuries of racial discrimination." Tuesday's ruling will likely bolster similar anti-affirmative action measures in several other states, and it comes as this spring marks 60 years since the landmark Supreme Court ruling of Brown versus Board of Education, which was intended to end segregation in America's public schools. But an explosive new report finds school integration never fully occurred, and in recent decades may have even been reversed. The resegregation of America's schools is the latest in an ongoing series by ProPublica called Segregation Now, Investigating America's Racial Divide, and it focuses on 3 generations in the same family in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
The report concludes that, quote, "While segregation as it is practiced today may be different than it was 60 years ago, it's no less pernicious in Tuscaloosa and elsewhere. It involves the removal and isolation of poor Black and Latino students, in particular from everyone else. In Tuscaloosa today, nearly 1 in 3 Black students attends a school that looks as if Brown v. Board of Education never happened." Well, for more, we're joined by the author of Segregation Now, the whole series, Nikole Hannah-Jones. She covers civil rights for ProPublica with a focus on segregation and discrimination in housing and schools. We welcome you to Democracy Now! Congratulations on this remarkable series. And coming out now, at the same time that the Supreme Court has backed a ban on race as a factor in college admissions. Before we talk about Tuscaloosa, if you could briefly comment on this idea that race shouldn't matter when you look at the schools of America.
Well, I think it's very obvious if you just look strictly at the facts that we still have a racialized K-12 system, and that Black and brown students tend to be in schools where they're receiving an inferior education. They have a less rigorous curriculum. They're less likely to get access to classes that will help them in college, such as advanced placement, physics, higher level math, and they are most likely to be taught by inexperienced teachers. So when you have this system where Black and brown students are receiving a very different education than white students, and then once you get to the college level, you say race no longer matters, and despite your disadvantage in a public education system, that now everyone should compete at the same level. I think in some sense there's just a big disconnect between what's happening on these 2 levels of education.
It's interesting, Justice Sotomayor's dissent, very eloquent dissent against Chief Roberts.
Yeah, so in 2007, Chief Justice Roberts wrote in a decision striking down voluntary desegregation orders in Seattle and in Louisville, Kentucky. And these were 2 districts that wanted to maintain integration in the schools because they understand the value of that for students, as I guess really in terms of education. And what Chief Justice Roberts said, a very pithy response, the way to stop discriminating on race is to stop discriminating on race. And Justice Sotomayor definitely addressed that and said you can't ignore the existence of race, and the way that you eliminate racial inequality is not to pretend that it doesn't exist. So she was directly kind of addressing that response.
Could you explain, Nikole, you said that minorities, Black and brown students receive an inferior education. Could you give a kind of overview of why that's the case? Is it because of districting, where schools, what schools get what kinds of resources, etc.? Why is that the case?
What's often forgotten about Brown was really addressing this system of racial caste that we had then, and that resources were really
what you mean by Brown. Brown versus Board of Education.
Right, Brown versus Board of Education, which was a 1954 ruling, the landmark ruling that struck down the concept of separate but equal in schools. And what it understood was that resources follow white students in this country, that schools that have a significant percentage of white students get better teachers, they get better textbooks, they get better really curriculum. And so today that's still the case. We have not eliminated that kind of connection between resources and race.
So